to interview Hannibal Lecter now.
It's not that bad. Neither am I.
Good. Okay, we're going to start by talking a bit about the Hilliker Curse, the current memoir. And I want to talk first because the very first words of this memoir, right after the Beethoven quote, and I know we're going to get back and talk about Beethoven tonight, but the first words you write in here are, "So women will love me."
Yes.
And I think those are some of the most compelling words I've seen in anyone's memoir. And they come back again and again in the book. They're kind of a refrain for the book. So I'm going to ask you to explain that, why those words, and why those words so many times in the book.
The thesis sentence of the book describes my 5-decade fixation with women as redemption and salvation. It's preceded by Litquake.m4v, Beethoven, the greatest artist ever spawned by civilizations, quote, "When he learned that he was going deaf, I will take fate by the throat." If you're a megalomaniac, and I am, and you want to identify with an artist, go for the greatest of all time. Because Beethoven will keep you humble, because the privation that he suffered in creating the greatest music of all time while stone deaf is Mickey Mouse compared to your privation or mine. And he was a mystic, and we don't quite know the identity of his immortal beloved, the woman he wrote his greatest music for. Thus, Beethoven and I as one. Twin souls, one of us is the greater genius, your call, not mine. And so the thesis sentence feeds off the well.
But I mean, this comes back for you, this idea of "so women will love me." So I get the idea from reading this that it underlines everything that you do. That in this book, your pursuit of women, that everything that you do, you become a writer, you think of everything to make women love you.
There's a great one-liner from the American 1950s. I want to find the guy who invented sex and ask him what he's working on now. There are people who get it, and there are people who don't. And the lukewarm chuckles that greeted this joke caused me to believe that most of you don't. So Ms. Newman and I, over the next 40 minutes, will discuss that. My books are all about bad men in love with strong women. The conjunction of men and women has driven me, flummoxed me, baffled me, and driven me for 5 decades. It's the heart of all the books I write.
Yeah, I mean, we see that theme over and over again in all your books, and you talk about this. And of course, in this book, you subtitled it "My Pursuit of Women."
Yes.
But what I find so interesting about this is, yes, there is, of course, over and over again your pursuit of women in this book, but you talk a lot about conjuring women. And I find this really interesting because you talk about this ability you have to bring women to you. That you imagine a woman, and specific women, and you put them in your work, and then they appear in your life. And as this a power that you have of bringing women to you. Talk about that, because it's like a magical power almost that you talk about.
Only 2 of the women that I have conjured have appeared in real life. So my batting average is about 0.05%. But they were auspicious women, Joan and Karen, when they materialized in the flesh. I'm extremely single-minded. My limited access to life, since I ignore culture, am computer illiterate, don't have a cell phone, don't watch TV, go to movies, or read, has given me a certain pithy insight into the few things that I dig, women chief among them. So in the course of 50 years of conjuring women, 2 of these women showed up in real life. You can make the case that I'm a pretty fucked up conjurer.
Well, I'm not so sure, because I'm not sure how many men I know can conjure up any women, so...
Most men lack imagination.
Well, speaking of that, because in the book you also talk quite a bit about imaginary women, or women that you have seen maybe once on a plane, or women that you know of, like Anne-Sophie von Otter, or the poet Anne Sexton, that you can imagine conversations with them. You can imagine them, and over again, you can actually talk to them. So that's kind of an imaginative thing. And so you clearly have a much better imagination. And that to me was very fascinating as well. The way that you can imagine women and have actual, almost relationships with them in your head.
It's a blessing, it's a curse. It's not quite the Hilliker curse. I learned as an only child, autodidact, from a broken home, to entertain myself with my mind early on. I have lain in the dark with the lights off, in total sensory deprivation, spinning stories since 1956. So I have conversations with women who aren't there, women that I've known, both intimately and not, women who I've glimpsed on the street, seen in dreams, or in the most prosaic of contexts. I've had numerous conversations with Beethoven, but the fucker is deaf, and he hasn't heard a word that I'm saying. Moreover, he speaks German, so I can't understand what he's saying. There is a key irony at the root of all this. I'm not interested in what most people have to say. I'm only talking to hear myself talk. The only people that I permit talking back to me are women.
Yeah, that is so interesting. So these conversations that you have with women that you talk about in the book, because they happen a lot, and they happen quite a bit at different times in your life. Do you see them as a way that keep you sane, or have the opposite effect for you?
It's a wonderful double-edged sword. My conversations with the great Swedish mezzo-soprano Anne-Sophie von Otter permitted me to morph Ms. Otter as a murderous car hop in Los Angeles in 1958 named Glenda Bledsoe. It's a process of transmogrification and reinvention. The woman that I coupled with here became the fictional character Joan Rosenklein in my novel Blood's a Rover. Both women shared the same given name. Parenthetically, when Joan Rosenklein says to Dwight Holly, "What do you want?" in Blood's a Rover, and he replies, "I want to fall, and I want you to catch me on the way down." That, to me, is Beethoven at his most thunderous and tender.
So you use a lot of this to create your characters, to feed your writing.
Every novel of mine has had its genesis in imaginary dialogue with either real or imaginary ones.
In your book, in the Hilliker Curse, I also noticed that every time you hit some very big emotional time in your life, you stop, you imagine the age your mother would have been at that time. You'll stop and say, at this time, my mother would have been, 60 some odd years old, 80 some odd years old. Did you ever imagine her there? And did you ever imagine an imaginary conversation with her at that time?
No, I did not. And the Hilliker Curse is more than a memoir, an autobiographical essay. I chose what to state, what to omit. There are very many deliberate omissions because the through line is my pursuit of women. So there's two Ellroys in this book. There's the younger dipshit engaging in misconduct. There's the mature, tall, distinguished, handsome model of probity who sits before you now, looking back on his dipshit self of 30 years earlier and telling you what it meant. So I, as a memoirist and autobiographical essayist, am permitted to comment retrospectively on my younger self.
But in all these sort of imaginary conversations with women, you didn't imagine one with your mother?
Sometimes I will say, mother, holy shit.
Because I read this book, and I know the curse, so I know what it is, but probably not everyone else does. Explain for everyone what the Hilliker Curse is.
On the occasion of my 10th birthday in March of 1958, my mother sat me down, half-gassed, on the couch of our shitty little pad in El Monte, California, and said, "Sonny, you're a young man now. You can choose. Do you want to live with me or your dad?" I said, "My dad." She reached across herself, whacked me in the head. I fell off the couch, gouged my head on a glass coffee table. Blood dripped into my eyes. I called her a drunk and a whore. She hit me again, then pulled back from it. I issued the Hilliker Curse. Her name was Jean Hilliker. Wished her dead. She died of murder 3 months later.
And I think particularly telling, they never found who murdered her.
They never found the killer. My mother was a tall, great-looking redhead, age 43. I had a shameful pre-adolescent boy's fixation on my mother. It's common as dirt. I didn't know that at the time. I bestowed upon myself and her the curse. It was a legacy of guilt and shame, and also a bidding to obsession. And obsession has worked out well for